top 10 Super Bowl halftime shows.
Usher put on a performance to remember at the 2023 Super Bowl, performing hits from his catalog of classics and bringing out incredible special guests in Alicia Keys, H.E.R, Lil Jon, Ludacris, Will.i.am, and Jermaine Dupri. Today, we will go over 10 of the best Super Bowl halftime shows in the history of the event. Let us know in the comments if you think Usher cracks the top 10 and where you think his performance should be on the list. Starting off the list is a historic performance from one of the best singers of all time that led to more people tuning in for the halftime show than the actual game. 1. Michael Jackson, 1993. Early on in the halftime show's history, the headlining acts were typically composed of marching bands or drill teams. However, in the early 90s, the league sought to make the performance more memorable and bring in the star power. They knocked this out of the park, making Michael Jackson the headliner. However, this was not an easy process. The league met multiple times with Jackson and his management, and he even turned them down 3 times. The fourth try would end up being the charm, and Jackson put on one of the best halftime shows in Super Bowl history. The performance was incredibly well received by fans and critics alike. Along with this, the halftime show made history as the first time in Super Bowl history that viewership of the performance increased between halves. 133.4 million people tuned in for this historic show, and it still holds the title as one of the most watched events in American television history. Up next is a performance that marked a triumphant return for one of the biggest stars in the world, setting forth a trend for halftime shows moving forward. 2. Beyonce, 2013. When Beyonce signed up to be the headlining act for the Super Bowl 48 halftime show, everyone knew that they were in for a performance to remember. Initially, it was rumored that her husband Jay-Z would be joining her on stage. However, he pulled out from the show last minute because he wanted the spotlight to be hers and did not want to take away from it. While Jay-Z would not end up joining her on stage, Kelly Rowland and Michelle Williams, Beyonce's co-members from Destiny's Child, would agree to perform. The trio would put on an incredible show, making for an incredible return to the spotlight for Beyonce, who previously was taking time away from the spotlight to focus on her family. Along with this, the show had a lasting impact on the direction of the headlining acts that we are still seeing today. Moving away from rock and roll headliners and focusing on a more modern sound. Interestingly, Beyonce's performance was such a high-scale production that it was attributed to the Superdome losing power in the second half of the Super Bowl. This would end up being a lengthy 34-minute intermission that was just another factor that made this show one of the best and most legendary of all time. This next show would go on to make history and make for an incredible last halftime show for Pepsi to sponsor. 3. Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Mary J. Blige, 50 Cent, Anderson .Paak, and Kendrick Lamar 2022. The Super Bowl 56 halftime performance was the first time in Super Bowl history that the show was centered entirely around hip-hop. The lineup featured a star-studded cast, with the headliners being Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Mary J. Blige, and Kendrick Lamar, with 50 Cent and Anderson .Paak serving as special guests. With this many performers, there were some worries that the show would be a bit congested. However, it was run to perfection. Each artist was able to perform some of their biggest hits before quickly transitioning to the next act. With many of the performers already having collaborations together, it made everything flow extremely well. It went on to win the Primetime Emmy Award for both Outstanding Production Design for a Variety Special and Outstanding Music Direction. This was another case in which viewership for the halftime show was higher than the game itself, with the show averaging 103.4 million viewers, while the game held an average of 101.1 million viewers. With the game taking place in Inglewood, California, the league could not have picked a better or more fitting lineup. Up next is arguably the most touching and heartfelt performance in the history of the Super Bowl halftime show. 4. U2, 2002. The planning and prep that went into the halftime show for the 2002 Super Bowl is arguably the most thorough the league has ever been. Initially, the show was set to feature Janet Jackson for the performance. However, following the September 11th attack, both the league and Jackson herself felt as if she would not be the best fit for such a serious show. The NFL's marketing executive at the time, John Collins, was now tasked with rushing to find a replacement act that was capable of putting on an entertaining and tasteful performance. In October of 2001, he attended a U2 concert in New York and got a first-hand look at how well the audience reacted to the band's performance of their song, One. During the song, a list of the names of the victims of 9/11 appeared on screen, making for an emotional tribute. Following this concert, Collins knew that he had found his act and the rest was history. To drum up interest for the show, NFL Films would reshoot the music videos for Stuck in a Moment You Can't Get Out of and Beautiful Day to include clips from NFL games. Just weeks before the performance, production issues would arise, and days before the Super Bowl, an NFL executive said it was going to be the worst halftime show ever. Despite the troubles leading up to the show, it would end up being one of the most well-designed and complex performances in Super Bowl history. U2 would go on to perform in a heart-shaped stage, and similar to the performance that sold Collins on the band, the names of the 9/11 victims were projected onto the roof of the Superdome. This ended up being an extremely well-done performance and achieved exactly what the NFL was looking for when they brought U2 on as the headliner. It was a very touching show, a perfect tribute, and still stands as one of the best halftime performances of all time. Up next is a show that many look at as the best of all time. 5. Prince 2007. Prince is one of the best live performers that the world has ever seen. So when it was announced that he would be the headliner for Super Bowl 41, viewers knew they were in for a treat. He chose to have the Florida A&M marching band join him for the performance. However, similar to many of the previously mentioned shows, there were a couple of roadblocks. This was the first time in halftime show history that there had been rain during the performance. However, this was a lot more than a light sprinkle. Some had described it as a downpour. While this may not seem like a big deal, the stage was made of a material that was slippery when wet. Prince and his dancers were wearing high heels, and the band was also using electric guitars. Despite all of these issues the weather could have caused, Prince maneuvered them masterfully and put on the greatest halftime show in Super Bowl history. Interestingly, he chose to do a fair share of covers rather than sticking to his own catalog. He performed these songs extremely well, with some liking the covers more than the originals. This is the pinnacle of Super Bowl performances and the ghost that headliners will likely be chasing for years to come. While there was a mixed reception to this next show, it would end up aging well and is now looked at as one of the best of all time. 6. Aerosmith, Britney Spears, NSYNC, Nelly, and Mary J. Blige 2001. The 2001 Super Bowl show was a very well-rounded lineup that had a little bit of something for almost all music fans. The lineup included Aerosmith, Britney Spears, NSYNC, Nelly, and Mary J. Blige. It also featured a pre-recorded skit from Ben Stiller, Adam Sandler, and Chris Rock. All acts performed very well, and while it was something that may not have looked like it would have fit well on paper, it was executed perfectly. Up next is a classic show that was extremely memorable. 7. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band 2009. While the 2009 halftime show with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band would only consist of 4 songs, it was still one of the best performances in Super Bowl history. The NFL had been getting Springsteen to perform for the Super Bowl for years leading up to this, and they finally got their guy in 2009. While the set list was a bit short, it forced him to perform only his best songs. This next performance would end up making history and breaking the internet. 8. Rihanna 2023. Similar to Beyonce's halftime performance in 2013, Rihanna's show a decade later would also be a return to the spotlight for her. Before this show, she had not participated in a live performance in 5 years. Leading up to the show, she teased that there may be a special guest making an appearance, and they were revealed in potentially the biggest moment from the entire show. She performed incredibly well with great stage design, with the crowning moment being when she closed the show, revealing to the crowd and millions watching at home that she was pregnant, leading to the internet breaking. Next up is a show from one of the greatest rock bands of all time. 9. The Rolling Stones 2006. Leading up to the Rolling Stones halftime show in 2006, there were quite a few disputes between the band and the league. The NFL was looking for a safe and non-controversial headliner following the Janet Jackson controversy the year prior. However, they ran into a few issues with the band, mainly stemming from some lyrics the league took offense to. Along with this, the Stones wanted to perform some music from their new album while the league wanted them to stick to their classics. Tensions got so high that Roger Goodell threatened to replace them just days before they were set to perform. Despite all of the issues that went on leading up to the show, they ended up putting on a great show that went off without a hitch. Rounding out the top 10 is another classic performance that defined this era of halftime shows. 10. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers 2008. Leading up to the 2008 halftime show, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were far from the league's first choice. It was later disclosed that they were looking at acts like Bruce Springsteen, Norah Jones, the Eagles, and Bon Jovi. However, Petty would end up putting on a show that had to have made the league thrilled that he ended up falling into their lap. The performance was one of the best of all time, led by a handful of the band's classics, and was even nominated for an Emmy.